uh, by Dr. Sanaz Ghazi and Dr. Shannon Alpert on bridging culture, enhancing project success through effective cross-cultural communications. And so brief introduction to presenters. Shannon Alpert is an associate teaching professor at Northeastern University and the program lead for the Masters of Science in Project Management. She also served as the academic director for the Lab of Inclusive Entrepreneurship. And with a background in managing projects in telecommunications, financial services, Shannon has also consulted in education, on project management and fundraising. She holds a doctorate degree in educational leadership with a number of certifications, project management, PMP, Six Sigma Green Belt, and Disciplined Agile Scrum Master. Dr. Sanaz Ghazi is an assistant teaching professor at Northeastern University in Toronto. She has extensive experience as a process improvement specialist and project manager at Princess Margaret Hospital, Canada's leading cancer research and treatment center. Sanaz holds a PhD in sustainability management and multiple certifications, including Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, PMP, and over the past 6 years, she has led projects across Canadian hospital to enhance care pathway and patients' care quality. Shannon and Sanaz, floor is yours. We are very excited to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adele, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. We're delighted to be here and sharing with you today. As I'm pulling up my presentation, I would like to ask you to let us know where you are in the world. And I will let you know that I'm joining from Nashville, Tennessee. And Sanaz, where are you today?
I am in Canada, Toronto right now.
Fantastic. Yeah, so let us know where you are in the world. I can't see the chat right now, but please do let us know. We'd love to know where you're coming from and learn a little bit more about you as we engage in this conversation over the next hour. So our presentation is about bridging cultures, as Adele said, bridging cultures, enhancing project success through effective cross-cultural communication. And we're delighted to be here and talking with you today. So over the next few minutes, we'll talk about why cross-cultural communication matters in projects, communication in the workplace that'll help us sort of set the stage for how projects and communication are related and how culture plays a role in that, the role of communication, the role of culture in communication, and also effective cross-cultural communication. So we'll start with a review of 3 case studies looking at cross-cultural communication matters. And following this opening activity, we'll look a little bit more about communication in the workplace, the role that geographic and cultural communication or community culture plays in communication. And then we'll look at the roadmap for success in effective cross-cultural communication in projects. Before we get into the content, though, I wanted to just mention that it's important that we're careful about cultural stereotypes and generalities. So certain aspects of culture may apply to individuals that identify with that culture, and it may not apply to all individuals in that culture. So while it's important to know that there are some cultural aspects and some important communication aspects to culture and to helping us be more effective in projects, keep in mind that not every member of every cultural group may identify with all of those particular cultural norms. So keep in mind, cultures view gestures, nonverbal communication, humor, and language differently. And so we want to explore some of these in the presentation today, but do keep in mind that we want to approach this with a healthy dose of empathy, right? Respecting the perspectives of others and really trying to see the perspectives of others. Now, as project managers, you know that we set the tone for our teams. And so being effective cross-cultural communicators will help to influence how our teams are communicating with each other. All right, so with that, let's look at our first scenario. So we're going to look at 3 scenarios today. And what I'd like you to do is come with me on this journey. We'll talk about the project scenario. We'll talk about the communication dilemma or the conflict that's happening. And then I'd like you to think about whether or not you've seen anything like this before. And if you have, I'd love for you to share in the chat if you've seen something like this before and if you have any ideas about how to address it. So this will be our little interactive session of the time that we have together. So the first scenario, there's a global technology company preparing to launch a new product simultaneously in North America, Asia, and Europe. And the project management team includes members from all three regions. So the conflict is that there are some differences in communication styles and work practices. And unfortunately, this is leading to some delays and some misunderstandings. Some team members really prefer indirect communication and consensus building, and others really want direct communication and individual accountability. And in addition to this, work schedules and time zones are preventing the kind of collaboration that's needed for the project to be successful. So I'm just curious, again, if you've seen anything like or experienced anything like this before, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. And if you have any ideas about how you might address this, how you might address this particular conflict, we'd love to see that as well. So we'll take about 10 seconds to give you a chance to think that through, and then I'll give you some ideas that we come up with. Okay, so hopefully there's some things coming into the chat. I see some chats happening. I can't read them all at the moment, but hopefully you got a chance to think that through a little bit. Okay, so here's a possible path to resolution. And you note, I didn't include this. I didn't say this was the resolution or the solution to the problem, because this is just one potential path that might, in fact, address this particular conflict. And certainly it's a step in the right direction, but it may not be the entire solution. So the path to resolution that we came up with here was that the project manager could use collaborative tools to accommodate different time zones, work schedules, and communication preferences. And as a result, hopefully, ideally, the team will improve communication and successfully launch the project on time. So that's our first scenario. Let's do this 2 more times very quickly, and then we'll turn it over. We'll look at some communication statistics, and then we'll turn it over to Sanaz for some more information on our roadmap. Okay, so our next scenario, there's a multinational corporation that's assembled a virtual team to develop a new software application. The team members are located in India, the US, and Brazil. All right, so here's the conflict. There's some differences, again, you hear this, but differences in decision-making approach. That's very common across different cultures. So there's some differences in decision-making and problem-solving approaches, and they're creating some friction in this particular project. Some team members prefer a hierarchical approach to decision-making. Others prefer a more democratic approach. And this leads to some confusion and some delays in reaching consensus on key project decisions. I don't know about you, but for those of you in the audience who are project managers, and I do recognize that not all of you may be project managers, but many of the lessons and the tips we'll be providing today will relate to you as well, regardless of whether or not you're a project manager at this point in time. But for those of you who are project managers, I'm sure you've seen something similar. Confusion, delays in reaching consensus. Certainly that's something that I've experienced. So think about that. If there's anything you want to share in the chat, we'd love to see that as well. So I'll give you just a few seconds to do that. And then we'll look at one possible path to resolution for this. Okay, so one possible path to resolution could be that the project manager identifies a decision-making framework that incorporates elements of different cultures. And that's very important so that we consider, and again, we're going back to that word empathy again. So we're using a healthy dose of empathy. We're trying to see the perspectives of others and recognize and value those perspectives as we're all working together and collaborating to achieve the project goal. So as a result of this, the project manager fosters a more inclusive environment that leads to faster and more effective decision-making and project progress. All right, so let's take a look at our last scenario here. A European construction company is managing a large infrastructure project in an African country. The project team includes local workers and engineers from Europe. So we have teams from on the ground in the African countries, and then we also have teams from Europe as well. The conflict here is that there's some miscommunications that have arisen due to different attitudes toward time management, safety protocols, and authority. And notice, again, I said differences, right? We're not talking about a right or a wrong. We're talking about there's differences. So how do we overcome those? How do we address those? So I'll give you 1 second or a few seconds to think about that. Feel free to add some of your information into the chat if you have thoughts about if you've experienced this or if you have some solutions that might address this problem. Okay, so one possible path to resolution could be that the project manager arranges for some cultural awareness training to bridge the gap between the teams. I don't know if any of you have taken advantage of any of those kinds of training. There's lots out there. I remember I went through some training like this when I was at in another organization, and it was incredibly helpful. Again, not to suggest that every member of that culture is going to act in exactly the same way by those cultural norms, but it was very helpful to understand the background and be able to relate and then to get to the individual differences as well. So project manager arranges this cultural awareness training to help bridge the gap. By learning about these cultural norms and expectations, both of these teams develop that mutual respect and understanding, again, that empathy. The project manager adapts the project plan to integrate local customs and safety practices that improves cooperation, safety, and overall project efficiency. I think that's a good story. All these are really good stories, right? In the end, you can see that there's a scenario, there's a conflict, and there's a path to possible resolution. So I hope you're starting to see the importance of cross-cultural communication. I'm sure you had a notion of it before, and hopefully coming into the session now, you have a good sense of the value here. So let's take a look at one more slide, and then I'll turn it over to Sanaz after this. So communication in the workplace, there's some great statistics that are listed here. I think what's important to note is that a lot of projects fail. We talked a lot about this over the past couple of days of the symposium, yesterday and today. We've talked a lot about project failure. And so projects do fail because of communication and miscommunication. And it's really important to note that. There's a study that came out by PricewaterhouseCoopers that said that more than 50% of IT projects fail because of lack of communication or poor communication. So that lack of communication can obviously lead to lots of issues, as we saw in the scenarios before. So important to note that it's an incredibly important skill to have as a project manager. Oftentimes we put this in the bucket of power skills, communication skills, influencing skills, negotiation, and they really are. They are power skills. Communication is one of those important power skills that you will need to develop as a project manager and continue to develop, right? So a different angle on communication. Of course, we're talking about cross-cultural communication, but really developing those skills as a communicator and as an effective cross-cultural communicator will serve you very well. So now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Sanaz and give her a chance to share her screen. And Sanaz is going to talk to you a little bit about the factors that impact communication skills. As you might guess, culture plays a significant role in communication. And then following that discussion, Sanaz will discuss the roadmap for effective cross-cultural communication.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Shannon, for leading and kicking off the presentation. As Shannon mentioned that, and you notice already, we are from different backgrounds, we are from different cultures here, and this is the same situation that we experience where we are at workplaces, in the classroom, sitting next together, and we start communicating. So what is very important is to understand how we can have more effective communication with others by knowing their personality, by knowing about their culture, some behaviors or maybe personal styles that we take and we carry with ourselves coming from our culture, our background. Some of them are based on our personalities, and it's very good if we understand our personality and we know about others' personalities, and by maybe structuring and having a framework for that, we know how to have more effective communication with others. So when Shannon and I had this discussion and we started putting together this presentation and this research, so we were thinking of how we can create a roadmap for employees, for project managers who are working with stakeholders, with the diverse group, and they need to know personalities and behavior. So there are some factors which impact on communication. I mean, the skills that we need to consider. It's not just about language. It's not just about, how we present a project in a meeting or how we facilitate, the meeting with our stakeholders. Cross-cultural competence or cultural intelligence is another pillar of intelligence that we need to consider when we communicate with others. Active listening, digital communications, video conferencing, conflict resolution, and verbal communication, as well as nonverbal communication, writing skills. Most often we communicate with our colleagues via emails, right? So that's why we don't have verbal communication. We need to know that how to write, professionally and effectively when we communicate with them. Negotiation skill is another skill that we need to focus on, and presentation skill. So what we have, and I want just to walk you through the framework or maybe the roadmap that we created and we designed and we want to share with you. Prior to that, I just want to step back and I want to review the definition that we consider for culture, right? So we are coming from different cultures. Culture is a common set of values or beliefs from different geographical regions and communities, and its impact on our behavior and how we interact with others. Let's assume that right now when we are listening to this presentation, we have people from the US, from Canada, from other countries, as you already mentioned, that from India, right? So we carry and we take some cultural elements from those countries, and when we integrate and work together, we need to understand and know about those cultural elements. So in terms of those elements which impact on our communication, there are three components which impact directly on our behavior at workplace. I'm not sure if you paid attention to these three components or not, but the very first one is the human nature, right? So that's the universal element, and it's something that is inherited. We have it with ourselves, and everybody has unique personality, and it's very specific to any individual and the way that they communicate with others. What Shannon mentioned that, and it's very important to consider, is the cultural background. And one thing that we need to avoid and we need to correct ourselves is to stereotype when we are talking about people from different background or cultural background from other countries. For example, if I am from Middle East, right, it's not true to say or stereotype, the behaviors that people have from Middle East, me or other people from the same location, right? I have some the personalities that are unique to me. And then the last one is the personal profile. So it's about the way that I behave to others. I'm not the same as my siblings. I'm totally different with people from the same culture. So we need to consider the cultural profile as well as personal profile when we communicate with others. So this is a roadmap that Shannon and I created to have a very comprehensive overview of cultural differences by using some methods, some techniques and tests. You might be familiar with some of these tests or methods, and you already have used them when you want to communicate with others, or maybe you use other techniques. But we're thinking of just to introduce you some of these techniques and how we can use them in practice when we want to have more effective communications with others. The very first step is to know in our teams or maybe in the classroom with our classmates or with our friends, right? What's their background from the cultural profile? So that's why we focus on two methods. So one of them is Hofstede. That's a 6-layer Hofstede method to evaluate cultural profile. Another one is based on the approach, which is introduced by Erin Meyers, and it focuses on quite similar components or factors with different extremes. That I walk you through these methods regarding cultural profile at very high level. If I am from Iran, if somebody is from the US, if we have a counterpartner from Canada, right? What kind of behavior or personal attitudes we expect to see in these people from different cultures, from different countries. That's very high level, I would say, assessment that and understanding that we can have when we go through these methods. The next one is when we narrow down our study or assessment and we know about personal profile. So there are 3 tests that we adopted at Northeastern for the Masters of Program in Project Management, and we embedded these 3 tests in our program in the courses that we offer. So one of them is ICH, another one is Myers-Briggs and DISC, that I walk you through some of them to give you some ideas about how we use these tests to understand, first of all, our personal communication style, others' personal communication styles, and the recommendations that we get from any of these tests to have better communication or more effective communication with others. And the next step is that by knowing about cultural and personal communication style, we need to practice how we have first impression on others, how we use our body language, or how we use our maybe facial expression when we communicate with others. It interprets differently in different cultures, and we may not pay enough attention to it. How many times I use this, or I showed this? Is it the same meaning of, okay, yeah, I agree with you, right? Or maybe it interprets totally different or in a negative way. And then finally, the last step is to flex your style by using simple and appropriate language to communicate with others in professional, the settings or at workplaces. So the very first step is when we want to assess, their teammates, our classmates, our friends based on their culture. One of the techniques is Hofstede model, which covers these, the pillars or these categories. As you can see here, it focuses on power distance, individualism, motivation towards achievement and success, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. These are the dimensions of this model. And you see that for each dimension, we have 2 extremes, right? For example, for power distance, there is one extreme which is small and another one that is large. It means that when we look at, the culture and we evaluate it based on this dimension, power distance, it means that in this country, that traditionally or based on their culture, they consider power is distributed unequally. So it means that they see inequity in power when it's distributed, in that country. And there are 2 extremes for that. When we are talking about individualism, so one extreme of that is collectivist. Another one, as you can see here, is individualistic. So for a country with people with these, the kind of characteristics or behavior, when people are from countries identified as individualistic, means that those people are just thinking about themselves, their behavior, their life, and their family, and their goal and their behavior is toward I instead of we. right? So when we are talking about collectivists, those people from this country are more about, that we are doing this work, right? They believe to team working and they want to highlight that. So motivation towards achievement and success. For people from countries which are identified as decisive, it means that whatever they do, it's just based on achieving the goal and achievements. So that's why they have very high level of competition among people at workplaces. Versus those ones from consensus oriented, right? For them, other aspects of doing at workplace, having better communication with colleagues, very important, I would say, identifiers or maybe factors to have to enjoy at workplace. So uncertainty avoidance, two extremes are uncertainty avoidance and low certainty avoidance, which means that for those countries or those people from the country with uncertainty avoidance, they don't want to take risk and they have very low tolerance for risk. So it means that these people just want to explore something that is not associated with ambiguity. But for those one with low certainty avoidance means that those countries or people from the countries who are risk taker, right? Some people are very brave to explore or maybe experience something new. And then in terms of long-term orientation, we have two extremes, long-term versus short-term. In terms of long-term, a country that has a long-term orientation focuses efforts on the future. And they usually carry traditions, carry behaviors with themselves versus those ones from short-term orientation. And the last but not the least is indulgence with two extremes, which include indulgent, those people who are free in their life. They feel that they don't need to obey or maybe put themselves in a very certain frames or specific structures and framework versus those ones who are restrained, right? So those kind of people, they need to follow structures and they are coming from countries with this behavior or these beliefs. As you can see here, and we in the slide presentation, we added a link to these tools. You can test it, you can try it just to see that for your countries, for your country versus other countries. Maybe you live in Canada, in the US, but you are from, I don't know, maybe China, you are from India, and you see that which similarities as an overlap you have versus those differences that you need to be aware of and practice to have better communication with them. So as you can see here, for Canada, I just picked 4 countries to compare and show you the result of this, the tool or test. And you can use different, ways to visualize the results. One of them is the bar chart, another one is the radar chart, as you can see here. But for the power distance, as it's identified in this bar chart. So for Canada and the US, right? So as you can see here, power distance got the lowest score for Canada and the US compared to China and India, which means that people are working at workplace in the metrics format. They are quite equal and they can freely communicate with their managers, with their supervisors, right, compared to maybe China and India. So in terms of individualism, as you can see here, the highest score goes to Canada and the United States. So it means that I focus on my work and I want to make sure I complete my work, and I deliver the result. So motivation towards achievement and success, you can see that the highest score, go to China and the United States. So it means that these countries very concerned about the outcomes, delivering the results, and more important than lifestyle or maybe how they enjoy at work. Uncertainty avoidance, the highest score goes to Canada and the United States. So it means that they prefer to, experience something which is based on their past experience rather than something new, right? And the long-term orientation, the highest score goes to China, and it's very interesting to see this result. It means that in China they look at the long-term plan, they look at the traditions that they have and the behavior, and they plan for the long term in their organization instead of the short-term orientation. And the last one is indulgence, and you can see the highest score goes to Canada and the United States. Means that people are free and they don't want to put themselves in a frame or maybe a certain structure. So another approach or maybe another methodology introduced by Aaron Meyers to out the cultures based on, as you can see here, communication style, evaluation style, leadership or leading style, decision making style, trusting style, disagreement or negotiation style, and scheduling style. Aaron Meyer is one of the advocates to map the cultures and focuses on the cultural behavior. So as you can see here in this methodology, and it focuses on just a few countries. So you see that the low context versus high context means that for those countries, same as the United States and Canada, with low context, it means that they want to have very clear communication with their counterpartners, with their stakeholders, with their co-workers, right? Compared to reading between the lines. For example, in Korea, in maybe Japan, they prefer, or in China, they have indirect communication. In terms of providing negative feedback, as you can see here, Russia, among other countries, people from this country, based on the evaluation, wants to have very direct, the way to provide feedback, even the feedback is negative, right? And then in terms of the leadership, when we are talking about hierarchy, or maybe the leadership at the same level, we can see that for the United States and Canada is more, towards having a free leadership, or more, I would say, the style that we have a teamwork rather than hierarchy. For decision making, as you can see here, if there is a top down for countries like Indonesia, or we have Korea, China, India, compared to the US and Canada. So they mainly, they prefer to have collaborative work and make decisions collaboratively. In terms of trusting, this dimension focuses on how we trust others at workplace. If you do your work, you achieve the result and you deliver the result, it's task-based. If you have a long-term relationship with your coworker, is another extreme of this, the component of evaluation. So, and you can see that, for example, for the United States and Canada, based on what you achieve, they evaluate and trust you, right? And they say that, okay, you are a doer, you are somebody who can complete, the project or deliver the result, compared to the long-term relationship with your coworker, to trust them. Disagreement. So people from countries like Russia, or maybe maybe the United States is at the middle. So you can see that they want to confront when they are in the negotiation or conflict, or they have some kind of disagreement, but other countries prefer to avoid confrontation. And then scheduling. So when it says that linear, I mean the time, and you see that for the United States, the UK, and Canada, and Japan, it's more linear. It means that people from these countries stick to the timelines, and compared to those ones who are open and flexible to maybe make any changes in the timelines to deliver, I mean, the task or a project. And as you can see here, the way that we communicate means differently or maybe interprets differently. And I just picked this picture for you to highlight that when we ask somebody, for example, from the US to provide you a portrait, the portrait is like this, right? The same question from a person from Japan, a portrait could be like this. And if you are in the US and you ask for a portrait and you receive this, don't get upset. That's based on their culture, right? It's something very, depends on their norms, depends on the way that they define different aspects of communication or socialization. And you can see that this tool is very useful, and it's used to look at the different cultures among corporates. And you see that how we can compare people at corporates by using, the Aaron Mayer's tool, and consider the way to have more effective communication. So that was very high level. If we are from different countries, how we can focus on those dimensions and understand overlaps, similarities, differences. By knowing about differences, how we can have, a more effective communication with people from different countries. The next step, and which is more important, is to understand our personal communication style, right? By knowing our personal communication style, we can have better communication with others and more effective communication. So one of the methods is called DISC, as you can see here, and it has 4 components, or 4, the elements, which start with dominance. How, as a person, as an individual, you want to control situations, right? And that's very personal, that's very unique to your character, to your personality. So there are different scores to evaluate your personality based on this domain. Another one is influence, how you influence others and interact with other people and communicate with them. The next one is a steadiness, your temperament. So are you patient? Are you persistent? And what's your temperament, right? So based on the subcategories related to this domain, you can evaluate your personal style. And the last one is compliance. So it means that how well you put yourself in a frame, or maybe you follow norms and standards, or sometimes you don't have this personality, right? Even though there are certain standards at organizations, you want to speak up and you want to share your own, I would say, opinions, insights, and step out of those norms and standards. Another personal profile test is called ICH test, that was adopted by our program, and our students use it to evaluate their personal, profile. And it's an intercultural communication, self-assessment, and interactive tool, quite similar to DISC, and it focuses on relationship style, time management style, a sensory style, as well as message style. under each component that you see here, there are 3 to 4 categories that you can evaluate and assess your personality. And at the end, it gives you a list of recommendations how to communicate effectively with others from different cultures. What I liked about this approach compared to this, I just ran it, quickly yesterday, so that's why I say that I updated the slides based on my personal profile, and please don't judge me based on the answers you see here in this slide, but just a quick review to share with you the results. So it gives ideas about my message style, my relationship style, my sensory style, and my time management style. And what we can do when you get the result, you can compare it with other people from other countries. And there are some defaults or maybe survey results related to other people, from other countries. For example, I compared mine with the US managers, right? Blue dots that you see in these quadrants, the results of my evaluation and my assessment regarding, these components. But what you can see here, from 1 to 413 managers from the US, the circles you see in the graph shows their tendency or maybe how we can communicate with them. As you can see here, I am very well aligned in terms of the sensory style as well as time management style with people, the US managers, but message style, maybe I need to practice to have, the more effective communication with the US managers, because for me it's kind of indirect, and it seems that they have more direct, the communication style, right? And in terms of relationship style, for me, I rely on long-term relationship to work with people more effectively. But for them, it's just task-based, right? They see the efficiency, they see the high-performing group or team, they rely on them and work with them, regardless of how long they have work relationship with people, right? So based on this understanding and this evaluation, we have a better understanding of how to improve our communication style when we communicate with people then project in the US or maybe in Canada, in China, in India, and other countries. So just to wrap up the use of these 2 tools, let's look at 3 steps. So identify, for example, this is the theme that you have for your project, right? So the very first step is to identify national cultural identity among team members. So we have people from the US, and then just 1% current from Mexico, right? So when we have the list of people in our team from different cultures and countries, we can use Hofstede, the insight to identify culture value and dimensions and have a good understanding of, how they communicate culturally. And then by knowing about that at very high level, what they have with themselves based on the culture that they are coming from, we ask them to assess their personal communication style by going through one of these tests. And as you can see here, we can have the results for the entire team members in one graph and see similarities and how they can work together more efficient way, right, to improve their communication style among the team. So the next step is look at verbal and non-verbal cues and start having, the understanding and exploring individual differences. And empathy is something that we need to consider when we communicate with others. I know that I use, you use, the body language to convey our message, to communicate with others. I don't know if you paid attention when you use your body language, when you use, this kind of non-verbal gestures and their meanings. And if somebody, they gave you heads up or maybe commented on on the gesture or the body language that you use, but there are just a list of few of them I have here to share with you to see how they interpret differently in different cultures, right? So nodding the head, so it means yes in most cultures, but no in some parts of Greece, Yugoslavia, and Bulgaria and Turkey. So if we use that, right, it interprets differently. Eye contact is one of the, and it's very, interesting to look at this gesture or maybe body language when we use eye contact. I remember in communication and leadership, professional communication and leadership clubs like Toastmasters, when we go through their training, one of the first elements to communicate effectively with others is to have eye contact, right? And they evaluate you, they give you a score based on eye contact that you have with others. When you present something, when you are in one-on-one, the meeting, but encouraged, it means encouraged in America, Canada, and Europe, but it's considered rude in most Asian countries and Africa. So if they don't use eye contact, it's not because of they are not effective communicators, because of that's part of their culture, right? And we know that we can communicate with them and we can at least give them, the feedback about the Canadian culture, the American culture, and how they can improve it. Closing your eyes means bored or sleepy in America, but it means I'm listening and I'm concentrating in Japan, Thailand, and China. So, okay and thumbs up means good, good job, or fine in most countries, but it's considered insult in Australia and 5 in Japan, 1 in Germany. And making a V, it's a peace or victory in most parts of the world, but it depends on in which, the side you show it, right? If the back of your hand is facing, the outward like this, it means an insult in England and Australia. So make sure you use it in this way, okay? So these are the kind of the body language that we use when we communicate with others. And maybe it's a good idea if we work with stakeholders from different countries, do a little bit of research to understand, the gestures, the body language and how to communicate effectively with them. But to wrap up what we want to, share with you today, when we communicate with stakeholders from different countries, when we communicate with our colleagues, with our teammates, with our friends, maybe it's a good idea to go through Hofstede's model and explore our and others' personal profile, and then listen to accents and use clear language, right? We have people from different countries with, the different languages, and English is their second language. So we need to be mindful of your our body language, expressions, and gestures. And we need to speak at an appropriate pace to make sure they understand us and use language appropriately, simple language. And finally, demonstrate respect, direct versus indirect feedback based on the culture they are coming from. So that was something we thought that's very important in terms of communicating with our stakeholders, our clients, our colleagues, and teammates. And Shannon and I were very interested in sharing them with you. And we would be very happy to hear your feedback and thoughts or any questions.
Thank you very much, Shannon and Sanaz, for amazing presentation. I took note of all these tools and techniques that can be used for understanding cultural differences within the team and in different contexts. And we had great discussion in the chat. And we just have one question, but number of comments there that could obviously relates to the information that you provided in your presentation and how this information are important for leaders and project managers in order to maximize their project success through maximizing efficiency in the team and minimizing the risk that are associated with not understanding the cultural differences. We just have one question. I believe that is about uh, the data that we have. I think one method that you used, I'm going to the chat box, that goes to 1980. And the question is how relevant these data now in terms of, the difference between countries that you showed in one or two of your slides.
Regarding the data which is used in the tools and techniques, I think that maybe the question is related to the results I shared from Hofstede model, and it's based on the last data they collected from the surveys from different countries. And they just relied on data collected from surveys and showed the results based on the most recent data. I didn't notice that if the data I'm in the back to 1980, but the point is that, for example, for the ICH technique or approach, they ask researchers, they ask students, the educators and professors to go through the survey, and it's free, and they want to collect data because they want to have more recent data to relate and have more meaningful, the interpretation by focusing on subcategories. I think that the techniques and the tools that we use here are evolving, and they just rely on the results that they receive from, those ones who, they are taken the test or maybe the survey, and the most recent data help them to develop and evolve those techniques and tools.
Yeah, so I think engaging in that and going ahead and doing the Hofstede survey fills some of those gaps, because the more people that do that, the more information we have, the better the results would be ultimately, right? I see another question here, Adele. Perhaps this is, I'm looking, well,
which one?
Let's see. I may have missed one, but I do see one about from Nazila. Do you see that one as well? Sanaz, you might have to scroll up a little bit. Considering that countries are not monolithic and they often have diverse cultures, languages, and communication styles, even within their borders, how country-based analysis for communication culture can still be considered? Shouldn't it be complemented with the impact of globalization and the dynamic nature of culture itself? Cultural norms are not static in today's world. Completely agree. And as you said, Sanaz, within even within Canada, you have a different background. You now live in Canada, and you see lots of different cultures represented in Canada. And so, yes, absolutely, things continue to evolve. And as we said before, making sure that you approach this work or this conversation with a lot of empathy and understanding that their cultures and countries are not monolithic. We have lots of variation. So anything you want to add to that, Sanaz?
No, I agree with you, Shannon. So the way that we look at the tools and techniques is not an absolute. So we know that we have, there's some kind of unique personality which impacts on the way that we communicate with others, and these kind of the approaches help us to understand better some kind of behavior or maybe characteristics that we see among people. But as we highlighted and we emphasized, we cannot generalize or maybe stereotype them because it's very unique to each personality. So that's something to add to what you explained, Shannon.
I wonder if I can add something to this, because Jacques made an interesting point in the chat box when he said that even in, say, for instance, if we're focusing on the United States, we're living in a very, very, very now multicultural environment. And so, you know, we have to be very mindful, of course, of how we deal with the individuals that we live with in our country, let alone understanding all the nuances that we need to know and understand about working with people at the international level outside the United States. But just to address or ask you, the challenge of that is, as we become more diverse, which is the direction that we're going, we have companies now that have people from India, people from Germany, people from Chile, people from the Congo, working in one organization. How do you face the challenge of bringing this information to them, knowing that you're not talking to Americans who need to understand how to deal with the international community, but you're now dealing with a diverse group of 10, 15 people from various backgrounds, and those who just arrived maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago. So they haven't changed enough. I mean, they haven't gone through a process of 10, 15 years and to enculturate themselves in the American culture. They are living their own culture. So how do you address that when you have a company in the United States with multicultural individuals working at the international level to understand how to deal with the issues that you addressed today? What's the approach?
I can start, Sanaz, if you want.
Sure.
Yeah, so you said the magic word last, you said understand, right? So it goes back to the whole notion of seeking first to understand and then to be understood, right? So way back to our Covey roots here. And so some of these tools you can use with teams so that you do that at the outset. And with project teams, that's something we would actually recommend, that you take the time to do those kinds of assessments so that we understand who we're working with, and we can begin to respect those differences and understand the best ways to communicate with the project team members, for instance, if it's a project scenario. So really it's understanding, it's developing that empathy so that we all know and can approach each other in a respectful way and make sure that we're getting the best out of everyone in that environment. Sanaz, what would you add?
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. What I used, for my projects or even in the class, I ask question, from stakeholders or maybe from students. So about their background, if they have anything that they want to share, just as an icebreaker, right? If there is anything they want to highlight about the country they're coming from or something very unique to their culture, it helps me to understand when I communicated with them. So, and also to use it in the next maybe and the follow-up meetings that I had with them, and they appreciated that. But one experience that I want to share with you, and that was something I highlighted and I shared with Shannon, was that in one of the very first meetings that I had for a project in Canada, I used body language and I used maybe something like that or like this to expedite time in the meeting pace, and it considered rude, and they gave me a heads up and they say that we don't use it in Canada. So right after that time, I learned that I shouldn't use body language a lot when I'm not sure where it's appropriate to use it, right? Right now, I just try to use my hands when I want to use my body language, and I'm very concerned about how to use, the gesture, body language, because it impacts on the first impression people can get from us. Sometimes we are just on Teams, and some people, we don't see them. Maybe they turn off their camera and they just listen to our, the voices or to our presentation, to our talk, and they contribute, in the meeting the same way. But others, when we have face-to-face communication, this single facial expression or gesture and body language impact on them, and they maybe judge us based on what they see and what they observe. So that's something I've been very, concerned about, and I just try to consider that when I communicate, but I get feedback from them to understand about their cultures, about their background, and if there is something which is not considered appropriately in their culture, I just try to avoid it.
Let me just add one more thing to what you just said, because it's great, fantastic response. I would just add that your discussion identifies and clearly lays out the importance of the relationship between project management and leadership. And so for our audience, when you're in a position, as you might be in a leadership position, to create a team, that becomes the most critical piece of the puzzle. Finding the right person with the right leadership style, the understanding of the importance of how to work with a diverse group of people. And so if she or he is assigned to that team, knowing that they have people from a variety of different cultures, they're going to be working outside the United States. How does that team leader, and that's the point that I'm trying to make, and you guys made it beautifully, is that selecting the right person for that team will determine how well that team understands and relates to their responsibilities relative to that project and how it will ultimately succeed or maybe not. So the right person, the right individual with the right leadership style, with a critical, as Shannon said, understanding of that leadership responsibility will be the critical factor, I think, in determining the success of the rest is mechanical, making sure that people understand how and what to do and when to do and where, but getting them to focus on and understanding that the critical piece. So again, a great explanation of the relationship between leadership and the projects that are out there. Thank you so much.
And a key takeaway for me, quickly, if I may, is that the leader must be agile and willing to adapt based on the situation in which they're leading. So without the ability to do that, it's going to be absolute failure. Is it possible to give the last word to Jeffrey? Thompson, you can unmute yourself, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So great presentation. Thank you very much for sharing. I remember last year talking about the Hofstede model when I was doing my DEI presentation. And one of the thoughts I wanted to share quickly is that I believe what you presented is a great step in terms of emotional intelligence. We always talk about people, leaders, project leaders, having the right amount of emotional intelligence as they work with their teams, and just having that awareness to know that we need to appreciate that not because we're working here in Canada that everybody thinks and works the same way we do, and we need to have that awareness so that we may even know what is the appropriate questions to ask to elicit that engagement, appropriate engagement from our teams. So just wanted to quickly share that, and thank you again for the great presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks.
Thank you very much, everyone. So we're wrapping up, and we will have the next session in 12 minutes. And again, thank you, Shannon and Sanaz, for the great presentation. Appreciate it. We will be back in 12 minutes.